The insane story of Al Capone, the gangster who ruled Chicago. They called him Scarface, a nickname he despised, earned from a bar fight over a woman when he was just a young man. But the world would come to know him by another name entirely. Public enemy number one. Al Capone didn't just run a criminal empire. He became the face of an entire era, a symbol of excess, violence, and the American dream twisted into something dark and unforgettable. For a brief, explosive moment in history, he ruled Chicago with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove, throwing lavish parties while bodies piled up in the streets. This is the insane story of how a Brooklyn kid became America's most notorious gangster, built an empire worth hundreds of millions, and fell harder than anyone thought possible. # Brooklyn beginnings. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York. His parents, Gabriele and Teresa, had immigrated from Italy in 1893, settling in a crowded tenement in the Navy Yard section near the Brooklyn Bridge. They were part of a massive wave of Italian immigrants seeking opportunity in America, and they brought with them 7 children, eventually having 2 more on American soil. Al was the 4th child. The Capone family wasn't wealthy, but Gabriele worked steadily as a barber, and Teresa managed the household. By the standards of immigrant families in turn-of-the-century Brooklyn, they were respectable, law-abiding people. They had no criminal connections, no ties to the underworld. They simply wanted what every immigrant family wanted, a better life for their children. Young Al attended Public School 7 and later Public School 133. He was a bright kid, capable of good grades when he applied himself. But he had a temper, and he didn't respond well to authority. When he was 14, he hit a female teacher who had struck him first. The school expelled him, and that was the end of Al Capone's formal education. He never went back. Without school to occupy him, Capone drifted into the streets. Brooklyn in the 1910s was a breeding ground for organized crime. Neighborhood gangs controlled blocks, ran gambling operations, and settled disputes with fists and occasionally guns. Capone joined a street gang called the Brooklyn Rippers, then later the 40 Thieves Juniors. These weren't sophisticated criminal organizations. They were groups of young men looking for excitement, money, and respect, in a world that offered them few legitimate paths to any of those things. But everything changed when Capone met Johnny Torrio. Torrio ran the 5 Points Gang in Manhattan, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in New York. He was smart, strategic, and he saw something in the young Al Capone. By his late teens, Capone was working for Torrio in Manhattan, learning the business from a man who understood that violence was a tool, not a solution. Torrio taught him to think like a businessman first and a gangster second. During this time, Capone worked as a bartender and bouncer at the Harvard Inn, a dive bar and brothel in Coney Island, owned by mobster Frankie Yale. It was there in 1917 that he made a mistake that would mark him for life. He insulted a woman at the bar. Her brother, Frank Galluccio, didn't take kindly to it. He pulled a knife and slashed Capone 3 times across the left side of his face. The scars were deep and permanent. From that day forward, Al Capone carried the marks that would earn him a nickname he loathed, Scarface. # The Chicago Opportunity. In 1918, Capone married May Coughlin, an Irish Catholic girl from Brooklyn. By all accounts, he loved her deeply, and they had a son together, Albert Francis Capone, nicknamed Sonny. For a brief moment, it seemed like Capone might settle into a conventional life. He even took a legitimate job as a bookkeeper for a construction company. But legitimacy didn't last. In 1919, Johnny Torrio, who had moved to Chicago to work for his uncle, Big Jim Colosimo, called on Capone to join him. Chicago was on the verge of something massive. The 18th Amendment had been ratified, and Prohibition was about to become the law of the land. Starting January 17, 1920, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol would be illegal across the United States. Torrio saw what most people didn't. Prohibition wasn't going to stop Americans from drinking. It was going to make alcohol the most profitable illegal commodity in the country, and whoever controlled the supply would become unimaginably wealthy. Capone arrived in Chicago in 1920 and immediately went to work for Torrio. Big Jim Colosimo, Torrio's uncle, ran the city's prostitution rackets and had no interest in expanding into bootlegging. Torrio saw this as a problem. On May 11, 1920, Colosimo was shot and killed in his own restaurant. The murder was never solved, but most historians believe Torrio ordered the hit, possibly with Capone as the triggerman. With Colosimo gone, Torrio took over, and Capone became his right-hand man. The Chicago outfit, as it would come to be known, moved fast. They opened speakeasies, nightclubs, and breweries. They bribed cops, judges, and politicians. They formed alliances with other gangs and violently eliminated those who refused to cooperate. Money poured in, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, then millions of dollars. And through it all, Al Capone learned. He watched Torrio manage the business with precision, balancing brutality with diplomacy, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. By 1925, Capone was running much of the operation himself. Torrio had been shot in an assassination attempt and barely survived. After recovering, he made a decision that shocked everyone. He retired. He handed the entire Chicago outfit to Capone and moved back to New York. At just 26 years old, Al Capone became the boss of Chicago's underworld. King of Chicago, under Capone's leadership, the Chicago outfit exploded in size and scope. He didn't just run bootlegging operations. He controlled gambling, prostitution, and labor racketeering. He owned politicians and police officers. By the late 1920s, the outfit was bringing in an estimated $100 million per year, more than $1.7 billion in today's dollars. Capone himself was worth somewhere between $100 and $300 million at the height of his power. He operated from the Lexington Hotel, which became his fortress and headquarters. He lived lavishly, wearing custom-tailored suits, diamond jewelry, and smoking the finest cigars. He ate at the best restaurants and threw extravagant parties. He cultivated a public image as a modern-day Robin Hood, someone who came from nothing and made it big. He opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression, feeding thousands of unemployed Chicagoans. He positioned himself as a man of the people, a businessman who simply gave the public what it wanted. But beneath the expensive suits and charitable gestures was a ruthless gangster who maintained power through terror. Capone ordered countless murders. Rivals, informants, and even members of his own organization who showed disloyalty were eliminated without hesitation. He understood that in his world, respect came from fear. The violence escalated as rival gangs challenged Capone's control. The North Side Gang, led by Dean O'Banion and later by Bugs Moran, refused to submit to the outfit. Throughout the mid-1920s, Chicago became a war zone. Drive-by shootings, bombings, and assassinations became routine. The newspapers called it the Beer Wars. The most infamous moment came on Valentine's Day in 1929. 7 members of the North Side Gang were gathered in a garage on North Clark Street. 4 men entered, 2 dressed as police officers. They lined the gang members against the wall as if conducting a raid, then opened fire with Thompson submachine guns. All 7 men were killed in what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Though Capone was in Florida at the time and was never charged, everyone knew he ordered the hit. It was meant to eliminate Bugs Moran, but Moran arrived late and escaped. Still, the message was clear. Cross Al Capone and you die. The massacre changed everything. The brutality shocked even a city that had grown accustomed to gang violence. Public opinion began to turn. Law enforcement, which had been largely ineffective or complicit, faced pressure to take action. The federal government decided it was time to bring down public enemy number 1. The Fall, the man tasked with stopping Capone was Elliot Ness, a young Prohibition agent who assembled a team of incorruptible officers. They became known as the Untouchables because they couldn't be bribed. Ness and his team raided Capone's breweries, destroyed his equipment, and disrupted his supply chains. They cost him millions, but they couldn't build a criminal case strong enough to convict him. The federal government tried a different approach. They couldn't get Capone on murder, racketeering, or bootlegging, but they could get him on taxes. The IRS, led by Agent Frank Wilson, began investigating Capone's finances. It was painstaking work. Capone kept no records, conducted business in cash, and never put anything in his own name. But Wilson was methodical and relentless. The breakthrough came when they found a bookkeeper who had kept ledgers showing the outfit's income. they tracked down witnesses, including former associates willing to testify. Slowly, they built a case proving that Capone had earned substantial income and never paid taxes on it. On June 5, 1931, a federal grand jury indicted Al Capone on 22 counts of tax evasion. The trial began in October. Capone's lawyers initially believed they had bribed the jury, but the judge switched juries at the last minute. The case went forward. The evidence was overwhelming. On October 17, 1931, the jury found Capone guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. Judge James Wilkerson sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for tax evasion at that time. He was also fined $50,000 and ordered to pay $215,000 in back taxes plus interest. Al Capone, the man who had ruled Chicago through violence and intimidation, was brought down by accountants. Prison and Decline Capone began his sentence at the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, but he continued running his organization from behind bars, bribing guards and receiving visitors who updated him on business. The federal government decided this couldn't continue. In August 1934, they transferred him to Alcatraz, the newly opened maximum security prison on an island in San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz was designed to hold America's most dangerous criminals, and Capone was among its first inmates. At Alcatraz, there were no special privileges. No bribes worked, no visitors came easily. Capone was just another prisoner, and the isolation broke him. His health, which had been declining for years, deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from syphilis, which he had contracted as a young man and never properly treated. By the late 1930s, the disease had progressed to neurosyphilis, attacking his brain. Capone's mental state collapsed. He experienced confusion, disorientation, and delusions. The fearsome gangster who once controlled an empire was reduced to a man who could barely remember his own name. Other inmates reported that he spent much of his time talking to himself or making childish drawings. In 1939, after serving 7 years, Capone was released on parole due to his deteriorating condition. He was 40 years old, but had the mental capacity of a 12-year-old child. He returned to his estate in Palm Island, Florida, where his wife May cared for him. For the final years of his life, Capone lived in obscurity. The man who once dominated newspaper headlines was forgotten by a nation that had moved on. He occasionally fished, listened to music, and received visits from old friends. But he was a shell of his former self. On January 21, 1947, Al Capone suffered a stroke. He developed pneumonia, and on January 25th, surrounded by his family, he died. He was 48 years old. Legacy. Al Capone's story is American mythology made real. He represents both the promise and perversion of the American dream, the idea that anyone, regardless of where they start, can rise to the top. But his path to the top was paved with violence, corruption, and death. At his peak, he was untouchable, operating openly while law enforcement scrambled to stop him. He showed that organized crime could function like a corporation, with hierarchies, divisions, and strategic planning. He proved that in a city where everyone had a price, enough money could buy anything, including freedom. But his fall was just as spectacular as his rise. The government that couldn't catch him for murder caught him for math. And the disease he ignored destroyed what prison couldn't: his mind. Today, nearly 80 years after his death, Al Capone remains America's most famous gangster. His name is synonymous with organized crime. His image, the fedora, the cigar, the Tommy gun, defines how we picture the Prohibition era. He's been portrayed in countless films, television shows, and books, each retelling adding new layers to the legend. But beneath the legend was a man who caused immeasurable suffering. He ordered murders, corrupted government officials, and fed addiction for profit. He built an empire on human weakness and defended it with blood. Al Capone ruled Chicago for less than a decade, but the mark he left on American culture and criminal history will last forever. He showed the world what organized crime could become when ambition met opportunity. And he showed what happens when an empire built on violence inevitably turns on itself. Scarface, public enemy number one, the man who ruled Chicago. In the end, he was all of those things and none of them, just another gangster who rose too high and fell too hard, leaving behind a legend that will never die.